So, the other month I saw that Jeremy Klinger did a video ranking the Sonic games by difficulty, so I decided to try it with Mega Man. You all really liked it and asked me to make a Sonic-themed one despite that already existing. I looked at his final list, thought mine would be different enough to warrant my own take, so here we are. The rules are the same as my Mega Man video. I'm going to cover every platformer in the series, all the games that I think are main series or main series adjacent, and rank them from 1 to 5. A 1 is a game that I find mindlessly easy and offers nothing in the challenge department. A 5 is a game we need to lock in to win. A 3 is a balanced difficulty, and obviously 2 and 4 fall between the extremes. I'm only going to factor in each game's original version, not any re-releases like Sonic Origins that alter the lives and continues systems. So without further ado, let's begin. Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991 is an interesting one. Like the Mega Man games, I've played a lot of these games a plethora of times, so my opinion on how hard they are will depend on how experienced I am with the game now and how I feel like it would go on a first playthrough. So while I can get through Sonic 1 relatively easily, I'm going to start with what might be a controversial choice, but I'm going to give Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis a 5. The game starts off manageable in Green Hill Zone. Besides the spike glitch, the level doesn't really have a lot of hazards to avoid. It's a balanced intro stage, but the game's difficulty goes way up in Marble Zone as you have to avoid hazards and take your time as the pace of the game goes way down. Labyrinth Zone and Scrap Brain Zone are both huge difficulty spikes too. But the main reason the game earns a 5 is the continues system. You can earn continues in this game, but when you run out of them or turn off the console, you have to replay the entire game from the beginning. With a save system, this game would go down by several points, but in its original form, Sonic the Hedgehog will be a challenge and might even make you nervous in its tougher stages. Especially when Scrap Brain Zone Act 3 is just more Labyrinth Zone, which is the hardest and most nerve-wracking stage in the game with the underwater gameplay. I was considering giving the 8-bit counterpart to Sonic 1 a lower score because the game is approachable on most of its levels, but I decided to go higher for a few facts. First, the game also has no save system in either version, and then Jungle Zone Act 2 on the Master System version has a kill plane the second you off-screen the platforms below you. But then the Game Gear version has a way smaller field of view, so you gotta pick your poison there. Those facts made the game harder, as did the maze section in Scrap Brain Zone. Labyrinth Zone is also not the most fun thing in the world, but for the most part the game is easy enough in the moment-to-moment gameplay, like Green Hill and Bridge Zone are easy, but those later levels and the lack of a save system merit the game a 4. The 8-bit version of Sonic 2 was an easy 5. Even with the bigger screen in the Master System version, players are going to have to contend with obtuse gimmicks like the glider of Sky High Zone or the bubble section of Aqua Lake Zone. Besides that, you'll deal with bad camera angles and dull gameplay in segments of many stages like Gimmick Mountain or Green Hills Zone. So Sonic 2 for the Game Gear and Master System is not for the faint of heart, and it has the same save system as all the previously discussed games to boot, so easy 5. Sonic 2 on the Genesis is an interesting case. Like the first game, the challenge of each level is pretty reasonable, however the game in its original form features some of the toughest special stages in series history due to the frame rate and the visibility. Also, the original version of Sonic 2 might give you visibility trouble on your first playthrough since the game has the highest speed the series had seen up to this point, so crashing into things in the first go is common. Game overs also send you back to the title screen if you don't have continues. The game is longer than Sonic 1 in its total level count, and the final boss is far, far tougher than any boss in the OG game, really raising the stakes of getting a game over at the end. So while not as hard as the 8-bit version, Sonic 2 still earns a 5. Sonic CD for the Sega CD is a much different case than the previous games. This game's focus was not on fast-paced platforming, but instead Sonic needs to explore the levels to time travel and find the robot generators in the past to create a good future. This creates a lot of opportunities to learn the level design and experiment with Sonic's movement. The game's enjoyability was kind of stifled by how it played in the original Sega CD version, while the modern versions have allowed the game to really shine, but no matter what version you play, Sonic CD is a pretty approachable game. Since the focus is on exploration, the game smartly kept instant death hazards to a minimum. But then, when judging the game by how hard it was, this one isn't going to rank super high. In fact, I'm giving it a 2. I don't think it's effortless to play by any means, especially if you really engage with the time travel and exploration, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is pretty simple if you've played any other game. Sonic Chaos, on the other hand, will be the first 1 on the list. Every time I play this game, like just recently for a soon-to-be-released video, I'm impressed by how easy the game is. It offers extra lives and continues almost constantly, and the levels are really short. The only part of the game that drives up the challenge is the final boss, but only because the hitbox and Robotnik's attacks are ridiculous, but the entire rest of the game was a total cakewalk, so it's gonna get a 1. Sonic 3 is an interesting case in the list. Obviously because it was split into 2 games, Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, that can be combined into one, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But I'm gonna count all 3 separately. Both games have the best level design and difficulty balancing of any Sonic game on the Genesis, perhaps the best in the series, to be honest. The game has cool set pieces, but also difficult segments and platforming challenges that are rewarding to overcome. Sonic 3 also has a save system, so Sonic 3 gets a 3 in even difficulty. Sonic & Knuckles is home to the harder levels and special stages, which is appropriate because it is the back half of the game. However, Sonic & Knuckles on its own does not have a save system, so you gotta get through tough levels like Lava Reef and Sandopolis and Death Egg in one go. But it's still really fair to play, so I'm going to give it a 4. But then, Sonic 3 & Knuckles has a game-wide save system for all 14 zones, so I'm going to give that a 3 again. Sonic Triple Trouble is an interesting case. Similar to Chaos, the game hands continues out like candy and isn't that hard, but I'm still going to rate it over Chaos with a 2. The moment-to-moment gameplay has more for you to react to and is just more fun to play, like using the snowboard power-up in Robotnik Winter or chasing the train in Sunset Park. Tidal Plant and Atomic Destroyer also up the challenge, while still not being super tough, so I think a 2 is fair for this game. Knuckles Chaotix is the often forgotten Sega 32X platformer, and if you ask me, it's been forgotten for a reason. This game is awful. Like Sonic CD, it keeps hazards and obstacles to a minimum, but in this game's case, that's almost none at all, and the game doesn't really do it for a reason. It's like Antimatter the video game. And then every zone has 5 tedious acts, played in random order to cut up the monotony. I do not like this game. It has to be played to completion to understand how unfun it is. But yeah, the challenge is next to non-existent, especially if you play as Charmy and fly over the already lame levels, so this game gets a 1. Sonic 3D Blast is an isometric game where you look around flat levels for flickies. Honestly, if the game was any more challenging than it already was, it would become the most frustrating game on the list by far. What few moments of platforming that do exist in this game, like in Rusty Ruin Zone or Gene Gadget Zone, are some of the worst platforming sections in series history after all. But the designers knew that and instead had you looking around for specific targets. But that doesn't make it fun nor challenging, so I'm going to give Sonic 3D Blast a 1 as well. When thinking about it, the game does have annoying bosses, but the levels are pretty easy and effortless, so that's why I'm giving it a 1. The game also doesn't have a save feature of any kind, but the levels are so easy it doesn't really matter. If you get continues, you'll be fine. If I could give Sonic Blast and the Game Gear a 0, I would. Well, I make the rules and the tiers, so I guess I could, but I won't. Point is, this game sucks. Outside of Blue Marine Zone and Silver Castle, you'll play this game in a zombified state. It's one of the easiest Sonic games front to back, until it turns into a soul-devouring underwater maze a few zones in. Besides that, the game is completely in one ear and out the other, so I'm gonna give it a 1. Sonic Adventure is another interesting case because this game is super iconic, and I used to think it was an all-star game despite its issues, but whenever I replay it in the time since my review of it, I'm left thinking, as a whole, Sonic Adventure is alright. It's a good game with some phenomenal Sonic stages. And when considering the game's score on the difficulty scale, I'm going to give it a 2. If the game was just Sonic's campaign, maybe I'd give it a 3. This is a balanced campaign with fun, rewarding levels, however Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Gamma are all worthy of a 1. Tails has a small amount of stages that can basically beat themselves. Knuckles' levels guide you effortlessly to the emerald pieces, Amy's levels are a cakewalk, and Gamma's levels are too short to get much substance out of. Big Story is a total toss-up where I can sometimes play these levels and be done with them in 10 minutes, and other times be stuck on Twinkle Park for 10 minutes. So when talking about how all 6 playthroughs average out, it's about a 2. So that's the score for Sonic Adventure. Not that the game's quality or fun factor lives and dies by difficulty, it's just that this game is on the easier side, especially if you already know where to go and what to do. Sonic Pocket Adventure for the Neo Geo Pocket Color is an often forgotten part of the series' history. It never got re-released, and when playing it now, its best quality is how console-like the gameplay is compared to those Game Gear games. In my recent playthrough for the big Sonic video coming soon, I did die a few times, but it was never unmanageable. For the most part, things were on the easy side in the first several zones as I blazed through each stage. It was only the Wing Fortress clone level that gave me any trouble due to the bottomless pits, but that was only one level, so this game will also get a 2. Sonic Adventure 2 is a tough one. I'm leaning towards a 4 for multiple reasons. 1, this game refines the 3 best styles from SA1 and makes each one more focused and challenging than they were in that game. For beginners, the mech and treasure hunting levels might leave you feeling pretty stumped, be that the occasionally frustrating enemy placement of Tails' levels or the one-at-a-time radar from Knuckles and Rouge's stages. But then for advanced players, the A ranks for each stage are difficult to obtain for a lot of them. You can't really coast through an SA2 level even if you're experienced at the game. In SA1's Sonic levels, it's the opposite, where experience can just allow you to zoom through it like it's nothing. But in SA2, even in Sonic and Shadow stages, the score, the rings, your clear time, it all matters a lot and keeps you engaged with the gameplay. But none of it's top tier difficulty either, at least not in my opinion, so for that reason SA2 gets a 4. Sonic Advance was the first fully original Sonic game on Nintendo hardware, and it was a great game. The best handheld 2D Sonic gameplay the series had seen up to this point. For most of the game's run, it's pretty easy. The first 3 zones shouldn't give any players serious difficulty. They're fun to run around and explore, but aren't super challenging either, especially if you play as Tails and Knuckles. Sonic might struggle with Ice Mountain, but even then, there have been tougher underwater stages before this too. The difficulty goes up with Angel Island and Egg Rocket, since the amount of perilous set pieces and stage length are both up. This game also has an Amy campaign, which is the hard mode of the game since you can't jump to a ball or spin dash. I wanted to give Advance a 2, but considering the last 2 zones in the Amy campaign, I think it balances out to a 3. But clearly somebody making this game thought it was on the easy side because Sonic Advance 2 really bumps things up. Advance 2 wasn't content with being another recreation of the classic Sonic gameplay. Instead, it decided to do something new with 2D Sonic by introducing the Boost mode. Running forward for a bit will make Sonic, or whatever character you're playing as, break the sound barrier with these cool after images to show that you're doing it. Maintaining speed at this level is the challenge of the game, while pits and enemies are virtually everywhere. It's pretty fun when you get the hang of it, but it's one of the toughest games they had done in a while at this point, especially with its unforgiving special stage entry method and its system of making you do a whole zone again if you get a game over. For all that, I think Advance 2 is worthy of a 5. Sonic Heroes was the series' first multi-platform game, debuting on PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and PC. I bring that up because this game's development was quite troubled, leading to severe burnout and crunch from many developers. This game was one of the jankiest and most unpolished Sonic games ever made as a result. I still love Sonic Heroes because I've spent the better part of 20 years playing it, but holy moly, this game gets a 5 for all the wrong reasons. 3 zones in, you'll contend with some of the most unresponsive pinball controls ever with this odd up-close camera angle, and you'll repeatedly fight the programming when going from rail to rail in Zone 4, since switching rails can kill you in this game. In general, you can just die to the controls or random jank all the time in Sonic Heroes. With long levels and game overs, this game deserves a 5. Not to mention the occasionally frustrating Team Chaotix mission and the most difficult special stages in the franchise solely due to the jank factor. I have an easy enough time playing Heroes, but these special stages are beyond the brink of redeemable. So this game is a 5 due to how it's programmed, unlike Advance 2, which felt a lot more intentional with its difficulty. Sonic Advance 3 is up there with the second game. The game's challenge has a lot more to do with how its levels are designed. In case you didn't know, this is one of my favorite Sonic games, but almost every level is littered with some kind of instant death hazard that will be almost impossible to see coming because of how small the screen is in the Game Boy Advance. And then the zones become really tough pretty early on. You reach Ocean Base 3 zones in, and it only goes up in challenge from then to Chaos Angel, the final level. The game has 3 acts per zone, challenging bosses, and makes you collect 10 Chao in each zone to get the ability to find a key in a level that will give you 1 chance at a special stage. It's quite a lot. The game focuses on its partner system, and some combos are blatantly better than others, so for all those reasons, I'm going to say this game is worthy of a 5. Shadow the Hedgehog kind of prides itself as being a hardcore Sonic game, but despite that, it's not going to get a high score in the video. Shadow the Hedgehog is actually pretty easy. Similar to Sonic Heroes, you might die to control-related jank, but not nearly as often, because Shadow isn't much of a fast-paced platformer. It's more akin to the 3D Blast model of inching around and looking for targets. Some missions are more annoying than others. Some can be infuriating, in fact, like the hero mission of Lost Impact, but it's still pretty easy, just kind of boring. I don't think Shadow the Hedgehog is a mindless game like the games in the 1 category, especially since you've got to look around for some of the targets in various missions, so that will keep your brainwaves active, but it's still pretty easy to do, so Shadow 05 earns a 2. I knew Sonic Rush was going to get a high score in the video, but I wasn't sure which one. After replaying it, I felt like Sonic Rush is definitely challenging. Some parts, like the camera and altitude limit, were worthy of a 5, but I think you'll probably die less while playing this game than you would in Advance 2 or 3. The special stages are also far more approachable than those games, making this one less challenging than them. Even though it has tough moments like the bosses or the limited visibility in general, or the S ranks, I've only ever gotten a few of them in this game, but I ultimately think the game is worthy of a 4. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is truly the game that needs no introduction. It's bad. Quite bad. Famously unfinished and bad, in fact. So, like Sonic Heroes, it is going to score quite high because of how unfinished it is and how that affects the gameplay. For starters, the janky controls will get you killed in the most unpredictable ways. Shadow's Chaos Snap might get you warped out of bounds and plunged to your doom. In Super Speed section, Sonic can't change his trajectory in the air, which might send you into the abyss as well. The game only prompts you to save after action stages and bosses, so if a bunch of town missions are required to get to the next level, but then you get a game over in that level, you're going to need to do all those town missions again. See Sonic and Silver's Kingdom Valley as an example. Bosses will be difficult to understand in the first playthrough, like the Silver fight. Silver's whole story is littered with segments utterly ruined by bad gameplay and sloppy programming, like the ending of Dusty Desert. It's really quite something to think of every way this game screws up, but this isn't even meant to be a discussion of how it messes up. The real point here is that the game is shockingly frustrating on a first playthrough if you don't know what you're doing, so it gets a 5. Sonic Rivals is another often undiscussed handheld Sonic platformer, and for good reason. The gimmick of this game is that Sonic or your character of choice will race through the stages with another character using power-ups to attack the other character. But man, this game is boring as hell. Some of the level themes are cool and unique like Coliseum Highway, but the levels are just bland, not offering much in challenge while the enemy AI rubber bands to you like it's nobody's business. But even while doing that, the AI is supremely incompetent. The game isn't bad, just not that exciting to play, so it's gonna get a 1. Sonic and the Secret Rings is simple in theory. Sonic automatically runs forward, and your goal is to use the Wii Remote to steer him out of the way of obstacles, but in execution, the game is quite the ordeal to play through. Sonic's controls are unresponsive at first, so the game can sell improved handling to you as upgrades later in the game. Plus, many missions will require precise movement or you fail and have to restart. The game's later levels and extra missions can get super frustrating like in Pirate Storm or Skeleton Dome or Night Palace. Doesn't help that the game offers no clear path to completion as you won't know what missions are required to play and which ones are not. It really is a case where the way the game is designed makes it a lot more challenging than it otherwise would have been, as the Black Knight segment will go on to show. So, Secret Rings will get a 5. Sonic Rush Adventure is another one where I thought the ranking was a tough choice. It's the easiest Dimps game since Advance 1, but the campaign is pretty padded out with sailing to different islands, searching for materials to make new ships, and trying to track down the Chaos and Soul Emeralds. But the actual levels are pretty balanced, which will be evident in that super cool video coming soon. But when thinking about the difficulty of Rush Adventure, I'm leaning towards a 3, because it's not super easy, but not really straining either, so it's gonna fall in the middle. A game that is quite easy by comparison is Sonic Rivals 2. Honestly, I don't have much to add about this game compared to the first one. The core gameplay is the same of racing with other characters, and that didn't really work for me, and it isn't much better in Part 2. The game adds new minigames like Capture the Chow in a dual mode between Acts 1 and 2 of each zone. Those might be the most interesting parts of the game, but the game itself is just very dull and easy. They kinda kicked my butt as a kid, but that was then, and this is now. So, Sonic Rivals 2 gets a 1. I've always loved Sonic Unleashed, and what I've come to really love about it more than ever in the last few years is how difficult the game is. Sonic Unleashed is the hardest 3D Sonic game ever made, by intention, not by accident, and probably will stay that way. The response this game got at the time of its release led to every game after being much easier. With the Sonic levels, you're forced to memorize split-second shortcuts to get the best ranks, but the process of playing it is super fun because these are the fastest speeds Sonic has ever gone at, which makes the first playthrough really exciting. But mastering the game is an experience unlike any other Sonic game, made more difficult by how poorly the game performed on original hardware. But now we can play it on PC with 60 FPS and above, and that's how I came to fully S-rank all the DLC levels for the first time and realized this may be my favorite Sonic game ever made. It also has a decent God of War clone attached to it with the Werehog gameplay where you get to go combo mad with cool attacks. Though this is actually the easier side of the game despite the genre it's based on. But yeah, Sonic Unleashed gets a solid 5 because of how tough the campaign can get, and with game design as smart as Unleashed, I wouldn't have it any other way. Sonic Unleashed for the Wii is based on the same ideas, but it's not as good. The game is pretty unremarkable, and I grew up with both versions. This one has good level design for the day stages, but I never liked the controls, and the Wii Werehog is pretty basic and kinda boring to play. But in terms of challenge, I'd say this version's more of a 3. It's a simple version of Unleashed, but it makes the best of its limitations with strict timing-based S-ranks, and it has a small life count before you get a game over and can only be increased by collecting additional lives in the hub. So it's gonna sit in the middle of the list with a 3. I teased a moment ago that Sonic and the Black Knight was gonna rank on the opposite side of the list from Secret Rings, and yeah, this game's gonna get a flat 1. Black Knight is similar to Secret Rings in theory, but the difference between the two is that Black Knight controls better and revolves around swinging the Wii Remote to use the sword. The game's improvements, such as clearly showing the difference between mandatory and optional missions, contribute to why this game gets a 1. Black Knight is a really short game, and the fact that you can beat it in like 2 hours allows the sword gameplay to not really get monotonous. But still, the game is very easy. The spinning slash and soul surge make the game pretty easy. There are some difficulty spikes like the King Arthur boss fight or the final boss, but the rest of the game is very simple. So I gave the game a 1. I've made it pretty clear in my videos that I think Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 is a pile of trash. It plays and looks like garbage and is a game I haven't touched once since I uninstalled it following my Sonic 4 videos, but then, the game is pretty straightforward for most of its runtime. There aren't many levels and only this part with the torches gave me trouble. That and the final boss of Egg Station that follows a boss rush, but for the rest of the game it was very easy and had the homing attack to fight enemies with, reducing the challenge even more, as does the ability to restart special stages. But it's not like effortless like Chaotix or Chaos, so I'm going to give Episode 1 of Sonic 4 a 2. Despite sharing gameplay with Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors was a massive step back in the difficulty, but like Sonic CD, I don't think that's a bad thing. I also think Sonic Colors is a stellar game, just with a different, slower-paced approach compared to Sonic Unleashed, which I went into in my S-Ranks video a few months back, but still, Colors is much easier than Unleashed. Most of Colors is spent on 2D platforming and using Wisp power-ups to explore the levels to their fullest extent, and then 3D boost segments are rewards for completing them. But in terms of raw challenge, I think the game is pretty simple and easygoing, and it was designed to be that way. Even the S-Rank experience will be more about practice and execution than the adrenaline-pumping challenge of Unleashed. So I'm going to give Sonic Colors for the Wii a 2. Sonic Colors in the DS is very similar. I think it's more laid back than the previous Sonic Rush titles, but I'd say it's more challenging than Sonic Colors in the Wii, especially in the later levels like Planet Wisp, Aquarium Park, and Asteroid Coaster. Colors DS never becomes super frustrating, but it still keeps you engaged and makes you react to things at breakneck speed, like sliding through gaps in Asteroid Coaster. I think Colors DS is a balanced gameplay experience, so for that I'm giving it a 3. Sonic Generations is one of the most replayable Sonic games ever made, evidenced by how its 18 levels have kept me playing and replaying the game almost all the time for close to 15 years now. But like Sonic Colors before it, the game is more about the flow and exploration and replay value than the challenge factor. There will be a lot to explore and learn about Sonic Generations by replaying it, but the first time will be easygoing enough. I was like 11 when this game came out and I beat it in less than 24 hours, when it took me like a year to beat Unleashed when it came out when I was 8. So, like Colors, I'm giving Generations a 2. Sonic Generations in the 3DS is the Sonic Generations we have at home. This is a shame because Colors DS is a pretty good game, but Gen's 3DS just feels like a rushed tie-in game. Classic Sonic's early levels were copied and pasted from the Genesis games, and then the original levels for him were all pretty lame with pits and homing attack chains. And then modern Sonic is just about boosting to the end with minimal challenge. It's not an atrocious game, but it's going to get a 1. Sonic 4 Episode 2 is more of the same as Part 1. All the zones have at least one level I found challenging, like White Park Act 3, Oil Desert Act 3, and Acts 2 and 3 of Sky Fortress. The bosses are also pretty long too, which makes them tense at times. Which is more than I could say about Episode 1, so I'll give it 1 point higher than Episode 1, which means Episode 2 gets a 3. Sonic Lost World is a tough one. I remember thinking this game was crazy hard when it came out, and it definitely was the hardest Sonic Team game post-Unleashed, but I think the hardest or most annoying parts of Lost World are the one-off gimmicks. When you get to grips with them, it's not so bad. The regular gameplay will take some getting used to, as it's the only 3D Sonic game of its kind, but I guess I'm kind of numb to it or used to it by now. However, the first round will be quite a challenge for you, I imagine. And you need to collect a number of captured animals to progress, which might block progress, and the Red Ring Collection quest can be quite the lives drainer. I'm thinking this game is getting a 4. As if my rants about Lost World 3DS didn't make it obvious what this game was going to get, I had to go back to this mess for the 3rd time for a soon-to-be-released Big Sonic video this summer. And I really hate it. I really, really do. It's a gimmicky, frustrating mess, and its levels are outrageously long, especially for a handheld game. The pacing is atrocious, special stages are some of the worst in series history. It is a dump of a game. One of the worst Sonic games I've ever played, and I've played literally all of them at this point. Except maybe Sonic Jam on Gamecom. But anyway, yeah, Sonic Lost World on 3DS is so frustratingly unfun it gets a 5. I wasn't even sure if I was going to include the Sonic Boom era of games because these aren't main series Sonic games and calling them platformers is being quite generous, but Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric is the game that almost killed Sonic for good, so I'm going to count it and say it's a 1. The game is nothing but baby puzzles and baby combat. The hardest part is putting up with the cacophony of noise the game spews in your ear with constant dialogue. Dreadful game this one was. Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal also gets a 1. It's annoying how in-depth the exploration element is in this, but the levels are so dull and play themselves for most of the runtime. This one also sucks. Sonic Boom Fire and Ice heard the complaints about progression and exploration from Shattered Crystal and responded by taking that out and changing nothing else, leaving a game that plays itself for most of it, so it also gets a 1. Hope to never play it again for the rest of my life. After years of mediocre to shitty games, Sonic Mania arrives in 2017 to save the day. This game was a perfect throwback to the classic Sonic gameplay. I think it's good fun, though I wish it had fully original levels instead of using old zones for the majority of the runtime. However, that's irrelevant to the discussion of the video. How difficult is it? Well, like Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I think Mania is very fair and reasonable. Levels introduce challenges to overcome and gradually ramps the difficulty up at a good pace. You also have the same save screen as 3K, so I think Mania deserves the same score. It gets a 3. It's fair and balanced. My hatred of Sonic Forces needs no introduction, which in and of itself is an introduction, but yeah, this game sucks. Sorry for the spoiler. And part of why I hate it so much is that it has a lot to do with the score it's getting. Sonic Forces is one of the most mindless and easy games Sonic Team has ever put together. Full levels that require almost nothing of players besides boosting straight and occasionally jumping. Levels that are so short that you could probably complete every modern Sonic level in the fraction of the time it takes to beat the final level of Unleashed. Classic Sonic levels that are lame to play because of the controls, but equally easy, and Avatar levels that are fine but nothing to write home about since they're also short and easy. So Sonic Forces gets a well-deserved score of a 1. Even though Sonic Frontiers has difficulty options, I can't say I ever really noticed a difference besides the true final boss being locked behind hard mode. Discounting the Final Horizon DLC, I thought Frontiers was pretty easy as well. It was never Forces easy since the game requires you to be somewhat engaged with it. For example, in cyberspace levels, you're going to want to collect all 5 red rings and get the best clear time to get the most vault keys so you can grab Chaos Emeralds in the open world, which are required to become Supersonic and defeat the Titans. It's not supremely difficult to do any of that, but it does require more effort than none. Combat might be easy to spam your way through, but you have to press the buttons and counter enemy attacks even if that is basic, so at the end of the day, Frontiers is going to earn a 2. I haven't thought much about Sonic Superstars since it came out almost 2 years ago. In fact, this may be the first time I'm ever even mentioning it since then, but from what I remember, I thought the levels were easy to get to grips with, which would merit the game getting a 2, but then the bosses were all in the 4 to 5 range as they went on for really long and were placed right at the end of Act 2 of each zone. But mercifully, the game does not have lives or game overs, therefore you don't have any stress while refighting the bosses that you might have had if it did. So I'm going to place the game firmly in the middle with a 3. Sonic Dream Team was the Apple Arcade exclusive, and thank goodness I saw I had footage of this game on my hard drive before recording this voiceover because I genuinely forgot the game existed while writing the script. So I went back in and added the game. I liked Sonic Dream Team, and I thought it had a decent roster of levels and characters to play as. But as far as challenge was concerned, the game was a bit of a blur in my mind. I played it while I had the free trial of Apple Arcade and got through the game in 2 recording sessions. A lot of the time you need to look around for collectibles to beat stages, and that never really provided much hassle, so I'm going to give Dream Team a 1, but unlike a lot of these other games, it's an enjoyable game that was more laid back. And finally, you have Shadow Generations. Like Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations, I think Shadow Generations is a really fun and well-designed game from start to finish. However, this game will not provide much trouble for a newcomer. It also doesn't have lives or game overs and features a roster of levels that, despite offering a lot of depth and repeat runs, will be easy to understand and play. Obviously, I'm too biased to say what a true newcomer might think of this game, however I think what Colors and both generations do a good job of is having accessible controls and level design while also giving you reasons to come back and experience it more than once, which is quite good, and for that I'll give Shadow Generations a 2, but it's a positive score in this game's case. With all that laid out, it's time to now order them more concretely. When I ranked the Mega Man games, I put a bunch of games in the same category, but with Sonic, it's unsurprising to see a bunch of games in every tier for a variety of reasons. This is kind of what happens in such a big series with so many different styles and appeals and directions. There'll be a bit of a content spread in terms of how difficult these games actually are. Ideally, you'd want a game to get a 3 in the sense of it being an approachable challenge without much BS, but there are great games that got 2s, 4s, and 5s. Not much in terms of enjoyable 1s, though. I put mostly fuck-ass games in that category. But that's about all I have to say about that. What I do find interesting about this video is how it definitely gets you to think about what really counts as a main series Sonic game. My criteria for this video was purely platformers, but how many of them belong in the main series conversation? Well, that's what I intend to answer in the next video, so until that time comes, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.